All right. Good noon, everybody. I know what you're thinking. This isn't Monday. What is DJ doing in front of me right now? Well, there's a reason for that. It was more technical difficulties. So I apologize for the delay, but I didn't want to get too far behind on this study, so we're doing it today. We're on Judges chapter 15 for our study of self-righteous blood. In the last couple of chapters, we've been introduced to the character of Samson. In the two chapters before, over in chapter 13, we were really dealing mostly with his family and his semi miraculous birth, if that's what you can call it. I'm not really sure how to categorize that one, if someone's got a better word for that, because semi miraculous just seems, it doesn't, it just seems gross to me. I'm not sure about it. It doesn't seem like the right word. That's the best I can come up with for our purposes. But we saw his birth and the predictions of his birth, and then in the last chapter, in chapter 13, or I'm sorry, rather in chapter 14, we saw his defeat of a few Philistines. At the beginning of it, it seems like he's more likely to, what's the word for it, fraternize with the Philistines, in fact, trying to marry a Philistine woman. This is where he gets in this big party with the Philistines, and he sends this riddle, really bad riddle about something that happened to him personally that nobody was witness for. I don't get how that counts as a riddle, but somehow it did. And they are able to figure out the answer to this riddle by applying pressure to his wife, and he gets very mad about this. There was a bet about changes of clothes. He goes and kills some more Philistines so that they can have the clothing, and then he goes back to his home angry. And at the end of that, we saw that his father in law ends up giving his wife to his best man. And chapter 14 is going to pick up right in the middle of that narrative. So let's see what we got. Verse 1. I'm sorry, chapter 15. I can't get anything straight today. Verse 1. After some days, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go into my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow him to go in. And her father said, I really thought you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. So some time has passed. At first glance, it makes it look like it's been a few days, but then it mentions wheat harvest, which, that would be a matter of months or even seasons difference there. So it might have been a little bit of a longer of a time. Samson comes with a young goat. We might think of this as a similar idea of showing up in the ancient world with roses and a box of chocolates. Well, the romantic thing to do was to bring a young goat, which apparently at the time were very famous for how easy they were to tear apart. Anyway, that's what he ends up bringing. The best way to describe this appears to be conjugal visit. And it appears to be what the thought was from the very beginning. It seemed to be that people kind of got the idea that the husband and the wife were not going to be living together, but she was going to stay with her father, and then, whenever Samson wanted some, then he'd be going over there. Not a great idea for your marriage, by the way, but that's what he thought was going on, and it appears that's kind of what everybody expected out of this. And so as he goes to this, his father-in-law will not allow him to do it, explaining, "Yeah, I thought you hated her guts, so I gave her to your companion. But look, her little sister, she's even prettier. Do you want her instead?" Well, as you can imagine, Samson's not particularly happy about this. Verse 3, and Samson said to them, This time I shall be innocent in regards to the Philistines when I do them harm. So Samson is going to get his revenge on all the Philistines for the act of his father-in-law. So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail, and he put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines, and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. Then the Philistines said, Who has done this? And they said, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. All right. Definitely one of the less savory things Samson decides to do. I have to admit there's a certain amount of cleverness to this, but this is what Samson does. He catches 300 foxes. By the way, your version probably reads foxes, but don't be thinking like the North American red fox or something like that. What we call foxes, people in that area, well, they call it foxes too, but we would call those jackals most likely. So there's a couple of pretty important differences. One being that the jackal is a pack animal, whereas a fox is a solitary animal. I think a fox counts in the canine family, but they don't really act very much like dogs. But jackals do. And so you have these jackals, which would make it a little bit easier to catch all of them. Still, it'd be a pretty difficult thing to catch that many live animals and set them free like that. To me, this is indication that some of Samson's miraculous power was not just in his strength, right? If he's this superhero, not only does he have the super strength, he's got the super speed too. And he manages to catch all of them, and he's going to treat them in a very cruel way. Like I said, there's some cleverness to this because he is going to be able to destroy much of the Philistines' property with it. What he does is he ties them one by one he ties their tails together, and then he ties a torch to that tail, and then he lets them go. Well, as you can imagine, having the fire right behind them is going to panic the poor animals, and they're just going to run, and then it's going to be difficult because they're tied together, and there's going to be so much chaos. And he sets them right into the Philistines' fields and orchards, and he apparently burns down a ton of the Philistines' resources like this. Well, whatever you can say about this, it's you can see that there's almost a feud coming in between the Philistines and Samson. Uh, One of my commentators made a comparison between the actions of the Philistines and Samson to the actions of the Hatfields and the McCoys. There's almost a feud going on here, right? And if you're familiar with any sorts of feud, and take the Hatfields and McCoys, what happens here is there's always an escalation because somebody does something to somebody else, and the other feels the need to get vengeance. And they can't see far enough ahead of themselves to realize that if I do this, then they're going to come back and do something to me. That's pretty much how every feud has worked in history. Well, the same thing happens here. Samson does not see far out enough ahead that this action, and you might say that he's acting on behalf of God, in which case he's perfectly justified. But if he is not, then it appears he didn't predict what was going to happen next, which is that the Philistines were going to take some vengeance on him. You like that wife of yours so much that you were so mad about it, you were going to burn down all of our crops over this? Well, we'll just go ahead and burn her. Also, her father might be the reason for this, so we'll go ahead and burn him too for good measure. Not right, obviously. Nothing just about it, and it really shows you the character of the Philistines in this time. But it's an ugly chapter. Let's see where it goes from here. In verse 6, or I'm sorry, rather verse 7. And Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow, and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Once again, in our little Hatfield-McCoy feud here, because of the actions of the Philistines, who cannot see far enough ahead to understand that they are going to cause revenge on them, Samson is going to kill the people who just burned down his in-law family. The Bible says he struck them, what was it, hip to thigh? Was that it? Hip and thigh. Apparently this was some sort of idiom. Basically it means he was cruel and had no mercy in his attacks. We might say he took no prisoners, right? That's sort of an idiom that we have, which would have the same meaning. So he was very thorough in how he did this. And then it says he goes and he stayed in the cleft of the rock of Edom. Now, the rock of Edom is basically a mountain not too far from the city of Bethlehem, and it is a straight rock face. So this probably means that he was staying in some cave over there. It might be that he's finally figured out this vicious cycle of this feuding and realized they're going to try to come for him again. So he might be hiding out there and just hoping things kind of blow over. But as you can imagine, in our little Hatfield-McCoy feud, they're not going to. Verse 9. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. And the men of Judah said, Why have you come up against us? They said, We have come to bind Samson to do to him as he did to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom and said to Samson, Do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you've done to us? And he said to them, As they did to me, so have I done to them. And they said to him, We have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said, Swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. They said to him, No, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. So Samson staying over in this, I think you might have just been had a Class A view of the top of my noggin there for a moment. I'll try to take a couple of steps back. Samson's been hiding out in the cave, and the Philistines want revenge, but they can't find him. If you've watched enough movies, you might know where this is going, right? If Samson's our superhero, why do superheroes have their secret identities? Well, because if they are discovered, then their enemies might use their loved ones to get to them. And that's exactly what the Philistines do. They don't go directly after Samson's family, thank goodness, but they do go after the Jews in general. Apparently, some who were living in a place called Lehi. By the way, the meaning of the word Lehi is jawbone. That'll be important later. They attack there, and when the Jews ask, Hey, why are you attacking us? We understand you guys are in charge. We follow what you tell us to do. Why are you attacking us? The Philistines say because of the actions of Samson. Turn him over so that we can kill him like he killed so many of us. So the Jews, apparently knowing where he's at, go to the rock, or the cleft of the rock of Edom, and begin negotiating with him. About 1,000 of them go there, which might indicate that they understand how dangerous Samson is. So they go over there, and they begin to negotiate with Samson. He asks, Why have you come here? And they say, We've come to bind you and take you back to the Philistines. Don't you know that they're rulers over us? Look how much damage you've done to us by attacking them. It's a sad but common scenario where you have a God-appointed leader in the Bible, and his own people will go against him. Can't see the big picture. By the way, please don't make any mistakes here. Samson was indeed the God-appointed leader of the Israelites in this case. However, I'm not approving of everything he does. He makes some very stupid mistakes. He does some evil things in his accounts. Although I do believe that at the end of his life, he was righteous before God. So they say to him, Let us bind you so that we can bring you back to the Philistines so that they can take vengeance on you and they'll leave us alone. He makes them say, You promise you're not going to do any harm to me? You're just planning on binding me? And they said, Yes. And he comes out, and they bind him with ropes. 2 new ropes, the Bible says. The point of the new rope is that it would be sturdy and firm. They lead him to the Philistines. And let's see where it goes from there. When he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes were on his arms became as flax that is caught in the fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put it out his hand, and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of a donkey have I struck down 1,000 men. As soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hands, and the place was called Ramoth Lehi. All right. So these people from Lehi take Samson back to Lehi, and when the Philistines see him, they come at him with violent intent. The Bible says the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson. Remember, it is not Samson himself who is so strong that he's able to do these things. It's God working through Samson. And he manages to break those ropes as if they had already burnt to just tiny little pieces, as if they were threads. And he is going to find what the Bible says is a fresh jawbone of a donkey. Now, when it says that, it probably means that he saw the jawbone, but it wasn't entirely rotted away, so it was just a dry bone. There was probably some flesh still on it. Hopefully, it wasn't so fresh that it was still on the donkey at the time. I don't believe so. The Bible says he killed 1,000 Philistines with that, clearly through God's help. I don't care how strong you are. God's helping you out if you're able to kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey when they are all presumably well armed. I've always kind of wanted to know exactly what was going through these men's heads as they were realizing they were losing to one guy. What was guy number 784 thinking as he was climbing up the pile of his dead bodies right before oh yeah, I got him. He killed all these other guys, but I got him. Of course, that might not have been the case at all. It might have been that they very quickly realized they had no chance against him and tried to flee. But as we mentioned, I kind of think that one of the gifts that Samson was given for our superhero wasn't just super strength, but super speed as well. And so maybe he chased several of them down and killed them that way. Maybe God had confused the Philistines here so that they really weren't able to figure out that there's no way they're going to get this guy. And so they all did keep coming at Samson. Hard to say. But he kills him. And then Samson says, with the jawbone of a donkey, by the way, this is a poem. This is a poem recorded from Samson. And there's a little bit of wordplay here. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck down 1,000 men. Apparently, the Hebrew word for donkey and heaps is the same. And so you can kind of see the wordplay here, right? With the jawbone of a donkey, I managed to take heaps and heaps of these Philistines. I'm not sure why that's the same word, but there you go. So a little bit of poetry there. And then he throws away the jawbone, and they call that place Ramoth Lehi. As we already mentioned, the word Lehi means jawbone, and then Ramoth means mountain, so they called this the mountain of the jawbone. You might have picked up on the fact that they've already called this place Lehi. Obviously, the Judges writer is not referring to the place by whatever it was called before this incident. It was clearly named after this incident. So it's called Lehi because of Samson killing all those Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Verse 18. And he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, You have granted into this great salvation by the hand of your servant, and shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Then God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came from it, and when he drank, his spirit returned to him, and he revived. Therefore the name of it was called En Hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day. So apparently, after killing 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, Samson was thirsty. I guess that is pretty thirsty work, so I can understand that. He prays to God. One of only 2 times we have record of Samson praying, by the way, but he prays here to let some water come forth for him, and God creates a new spring in that area, and Samson drinks from that. I suppose this is the Judges writer doing some apologetic work here, because the point is, you can go to see where this spring is even to this day. I don't know if we still know where that is to this day. A lot of these sorts of things we often don't, but it would be cool to see it if I happen to be in that area of Israel. If anyone ever has seen something like that, or if you know about something like that, I'd be interested to hear it. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So, much like the ending of the other judges, the ending of the account of Samson ends with how long he judged over the Israelites. And it's much repetition from before, right? You have the oppressor people, and you have the accounts of how this judge managed to save the Israelites from the oppressing people, and how long they judged after that, and after that they die, and we move on to the next judge, right? Well, not quite, because there's still some more to go in the life of Samson. Up until this point, we were looking into the very early life of Samson. We're going to fast forward to the late life of Samson in the next chapter, because those Philistines, which he was so eager to get rid of, and this great blow he dealt against them, apparently they weren't smart enough to keep out of affairs with Samson. And Samson's not going to be awfully smart either in the next chapter. But that's what we'll go over, Lord willing, next week. Thank you so much for taking this time to study with me. I love you all, and I hope to see you soon.